Great. Well, once again, thanks everyone for joining us today. I am Dr. Sarah Bois. I'm the Director of Research and Conservation at the Linda Laurie Nature Foundation, and you're here for the first installment of our 2026 Science Pub. I am going to start sharing my screen, so just hold on one sec. Oh, and if you weren't here earlier, if you hear that sound, it's been a snow day. I have dogs. They might make some noise. All right. Go into, there you go. Okay, great. Well, thanks everyone again for joining us. We're going to be talking about, or today's talk is no rain, no gain, collecting data for fun and forecasting. And let's see, let's get started. So this is just a brief outline of what we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to talk a little bit of weather history, why we measure and record weather and precipitation, what we're finding here on Nantucket, and how it impacts us. Maybe interest you in joining us and how you can participate in some of our programs about measuring precipitation. So I wasn't born here on Nantucket. I am a wash ashore, as we like to say. But I have never lived anywhere that is so attuned to weather patterns. So, and that is part of our cultural heritage, the DNA of being here on Nantucket, where being on an island, unlike many other places, you're constantly attuned to weather. So on a day-to-day basis, it affects us, but historically, it obviously affected the ability to gather resources, to go out fishing, to make a living on our whaling ships. And then even, as a maritime community, day-to-day weather affects our livelihoods and our boating life. We have, if anyone, for those of you on Nantucket, we have the Nantucket Life Saving Museum, which has a huge history of saving people and, the shipwrecks that were all around Nantucket, or people getting caught in storms that were, surprises that were unpredictable. And kind of trying to get around some of that unpredictability is how the Weather Service started in the United States. So this is the brief history part of this, but it ties back to why we have networks of data collection on weather. So, weather patterns, precipitation, storms, were very isolated as people were very isolated, and there wasn't a lot of communication, or communication was delayed. There was lots of records of post-storm events and historical records of what happened, especially for farming, but there wasn't really a way to communicate that in any timely manner that mattered. And it was really the development of telegraphs and the spreading out of the telegraph network that enabled weather communications to kind of be more effective. And so it was really in 1849 when these weather instruments kind of went along with these different telegraph companies that there was an organized network of communication about data and weather. And that was really the foundation for our modern weather service. And you can see these old maps from 1871 that had a surface weather map for what was going on. And today on Nantucket, I mean, this is pertinent to many areas, but because we live on an island, that day-to-day weather and knowing what's happening affects whether we can go on and off for doctor's appointments, whether the mail can come, whether we can get our medicine, but also things like, is it a good day for fishing or where should I go? Can we drive down the street or is there high tide flooding? And what's the timing of planting? So all of these things affect our everyday life. And how do we look at our weather? So historically, the record of the weather of note, where the main weather sources were collected were at airports. And so we have this, airport weather system that looks at specifically the weather as it pertains to the importance of, weather safety for flights. So we have obviously temperature, humidity, cloudiness, visibility, precipitation, wind. In our case on Nantucket, that a lot of that relates to fog and whether or not the planes can fly. And this map is just showing the airport weather stations in our area. I don't have a full number of how many there are across the country, but you can see that they're pretty spread out. And the rest of this talk, because we're focusing on a few of the different programs where we're collecting data, we're going to really be focusing on precipitation. I am going to mention a couple of other ways that we record weather, but weather broadly and other aspects of weather, but this really focuses on precipitation specifically. And why do we care so much about precipitation? I mean, I mentioned some of the ways, obviously, our agricultural community. We're interested in storms and and I'm, as an ecologist, interested in how much precipitation there is as it affects our flora and fauna. But we also know that with climate change that we're expecting an increase in precipitation. So in Massachusetts, since 1901, we've already seen a 15% increase in precipitation. And you can see in this map across the country that how precipitation has already changed is very variable across the country. And so using what's already happened, we can make predictions about what will happen. And this is at a national scale and then at a state scale. And then even within each state, there's kind of broken up into different areas. And so how do we get more localized information that we can look at for what's happened already so we can look at what's coming in the future? And then at the Linda Loring Nature Foundation, we're particularly interested in this as it relates to a lot of our other research and conservation projects. So the timing of, excuse me, what we know about weather and precipitation really affect nesting behaviors. It affects site fidelity. It affects the quality of nest areas for our migratory birds. It affects the quality, our water quality data is highly affected by temperature and precipitation. The timing of many events is affected by precipitation and aspects of temperature. So all of our different research projects can be related, or we have localized weather are really important aspects of looking at short-term weather trends and longer-term climate trends and how those are affect our different flora and fauna. So we at Linda Loring, we measure precipitation and other aspects of weather in four basic ways. I'm really going to focus on these first two, so the NOAA COOP station and CoCoRaHS, and I'll explain those a little bit more. But we do have a number of different ways that on site that we are looking at weather and specifically precipitation. So the first I want to talk about is the NOAA COOP station. So the COOP is the nickname for the Cooperative Observer Network. So this was created in 1890 under the Organic Act, and it's one of the formal networks that came out of those early Weather Service organization network. And it's really amazing because it's a very long, continuous record, and it's kind of very exciting to be part of this long history. It was started as the nation's weather and climate observing network of, by, and for the people. And it includes observations from the late 1800s all the way to the present. And so as part of the National Weather Service, you can access data that goes back to the late 1890s for many different areas. There's currently about more than 8,700 volunteers, and volunteers in this case are selected to be part of the COOP station. There's a lot more training involved, and so there are over 8,700 volunteers. And the Linda Loring Nature Foundation became a site in 2017. And that picture is of me and the former director of our local station, which is based out of Norton, Massachusetts, and that is the gauge. And so this map is a little old, but it's the best one that I could find that has all the COOP stations throughout the country. The different colors are just different levels of data collection, but basically this is the just about 8,700 volunteers that, excuse me, collect data on precipitation. The gauge is once again on the side. It's a big metal cylinder with a funnel, and then it funnels into a smaller cylinder that we measure daily. So the COOP station is really about standardizing equipment, standardizing the methods and the timing. It's a 24-hour precipitation. We collect data in the morning, and it's not only standardized across, the geographic sphere now, it's standardized, since the 1890s. So the actual data collection has not changed that much. And all these data are part of the Global Historical Climatology Network. It's a daily data set. Anyone can download the data. There is a 24-hour delay. And it's not as user friendly maybe as some of the interfaces we're used to now, but it is available and it's used by a lot of researchers, scientists, forecasters. It's a very big public service program that feeds into a lot of weather service data. But the meat of what I really love to talk about tonight is CoCoRaHS, which is really just fun to say, which is the Community Collaborative Rain, Hail, and Snow Network. And CoCoRaHS is built off of that weather station, or excuse me, the COOP precipitation network. Sorry, that's my puppy barking. So you can see this gauge on the left-hand side. It's a plastic gauge. It's smaller than the COOP station, um, but it's more maybe user-friendly. It's smaller, visible, and more accessible. So the CoCoRaHS program was created using a lot of the same data collection methods and principles as the NOAA COOP station, but the goal is more about getting everyone and anyone involved. So just to kind of see how these different things, these different weather collection, especially precipitation collection stations differ, when we look at the map of airport weather stations, you can see all those black dots are different weather stations and how they are spread out. The COOP stations, there's many more. There's over 8,700, and they are spread out. They're not quite uniform. There's gap areas, but there's more data collection. Um, and then when we go to the CoCoRaHS stations, there's over 26,000 active stations across the United States now. So while we go from the airport weather stations, which are highly specialized but pretty spread out, so very accurate data, but spread out geographically. The COOP stations have more training and are selected volunteers, so there's more of them, but still kind of more rigorous data collection. And then the CoCoRaHS is open to everyone and anyone, and there's so many different stations. And there's training and rigorous data collection, but it's kind of like the law of large numbers, so where we create a more dense network that helps with more accurate precipitation measures. So CoCoRaHS, as I said, is the Community Collaborative Rain, Hail, and Snow Network. It's a national grassroots nonprofit community-based organization. It's made up of volunteers of all ages and backgrounds, and people take daily measurements of precipitation right in their own backyards. It was started in 1998 out of Colorado, and I don't work for them. I don't represent them. I just love them and their work, and have been a member of CoCoRaHS for a long time. And so I'm just going to touch on some of the aspects of CoCoRaHS. And what I love about CoCoRaHS is it isn't just about the data collection, although that's number one is quality precipitation data over a huge network. But it's also really about education and connecting people to their own backyards, like what's happening in their own community, and giving people the power to understand more about their environment, collect data, and contribute to the whole, but then also get the information back very easily. So it's consistency of data collection, it's uniform data collection, the same time with the same equipment and the same methods. So how does it work? Well, you have a gauge, you install it. You read the gauge every morning before 9:30 a.m., but preferably between 7:30 and 9. Then you enter the data, and it can be entered on a desktop version or a laptop. There is an app that you can use as well. And then you can view the data right away. So the data are immediately viewable in one of their various map platforms, and you can look at it right away. And so can anyone else. And so the gauge is very similar to the coupe gauge, which is a lot bigger and metal. The metal one is because it's opaque, reduces the amount of evapotranspiration. So less water will be evaporated in the gauge. But the plastic funnel for the CoCoRaHS gauge makes it more affordable and accessible to people. So many more gauges could be put out. So the picture on the left shows basically how it's mounted. There's many different ways to mount a CoCoRaHS gauge. There's lots of information online, and I'm happy to talk about it more if you'd like to install one. But basically, you want to put it somewhere where it's not the rain could be collected without obstruction. There's an outer tube, which is the biggest, like is a 4-inch diameter. And then the inner tube is the actual measuring part. And then there's the funnel on top. Now, I'm not going to go into the formula for a cylinder and why this is so, but basically, if you're collecting the precipitation at that 4-inch diameter scale and you're funneling it into a smaller inner tube, that inner tube basically stretches out an inch measurement. And that makes it really a lot easier for us to just walk up and read the measurement up to 100th. So you can get 100th of an inch. If you are just looking at the small amount at the bottom of the larger cylinder, it's much more difficult to look at those finer scale measurements. Trust me, the math has already been done. It does work. It's maybe confusing to get your head around. It is sometimes when we train volunteers or our interns, but basically it's a way to kind of make data collection and visualizing that data a little bit more accurate. So here are just some pictures of our CoCoRaHS rain gauge at Linda Loring. We established in 2014, and we are MANT1 because we were the first station on Nantucket. So MA for the state, NT for the county, and #1 for the station number. So we're very proud of our #1 status. The left-hand side is when we first installed the gauge. You can see that new wood that we were for the post. There were pine trees around that blocked the wind, but they were non-native, so they have been in the intervening 12 years, they have been removed. And so our CoCoRaHS rain gauge now is a newer gauge because over time we had to replace it, but basically it's in the exact same spot. Here's it through different times of the year, different seasons. The picture on the left is not from today, but that is a snowy picture from probably 8 years ago or so. And you can see, I will talk about snow because we're going to go over what we measured today from our snowy day. But this is, kind of what can happen when the snow builds up because snow is not as uniform and falling as it is when it rains. So basically, when we measure precipitation, we go out every morning when we come to work and we measure the precipitation. It's 24 hours and very similar to when I mentioned the COOP station. It's standardized equipment, standardized methods, and standardized time of day that everyone, so it's more comparable across locations. And once again, the data are open to everyone. And then when we report the data, I just wanted to show what it looks like. The left-hand side is what it looks like if you're using a laptop or a desktop computer. The right-hand side is what the app looks like. That was just a screenshot from my phone, but it's taking the exact same information. I'm not going to go do a full training right now of exactly how you enter it and all the little nuances of it, but it's very, very easy. And any of us who have a phone can honestly just enter the data pretty quickly. And it's really just as important to measure the actual precipitation amount when it rains as it's almost as important, or if not just as important, to measure zeros. So for all the times we don't have any rain, it's really important to put a zero so that we know that we went to look for the rain, and we were trying to capture it, but it hasn't rained at all. And then there's viewing the data. So because CoCoRaHS has been around for a while, and one of their real goals is to make the data readily available for people, they serve the data in 4 different map views. And so this bigger one that I have out here is kind of the interactive map, as they call it. And you can see right away all the white little circles are gauges that have recorded zeros, and the color pattern is just the heat map of what has happened for precipitation. And there's different ways to view the data too. I'm not going to go into all the maps, but it's kind of fun to play around and just look at all the maps. So even if you don't have a gauge, you can go to CoCoRaHS.org and kind of play around with some of their maps and look at what's happened in different areas. And then you can also look at any of their training materials. So I thought, I've given versions of this presentation in the past, and I have examples of just kind of showing through, like we measured the data, we collected the precipitation, we measured it, and let's look at it. But I thought we would use yesterday's snowfall as an example because a lot of people are very interested. So take it with a grain of salt because it doesn't snow all that often on Nantucket. So we're not used to measuring snow quite as much. So if you think about, it's really easy when you're measuring liquid precipitation, right? You're just collecting the precipitation, you're reading the gauge, and then you dump it out and you record it. Snow is a little bit different because if you think about snow, we often talk about density of snow, right? So like, is it fluffy snow? Is it heavy snow? Can you make a snowball with it? Is it heavy when you're shoveling? If for those of you who were shoveling the last 24 hours, was it if you shoveled early, it was very light and fluffy and easy to scrape off your porch, but if you wait until today, it was a lot heavier. So how you measure the snow really you need to measure a few different ways. So these series of images are that you're looking at right now are how we measure the depth. So this is called a snow stick. Yes, it looks just like a yardstick, but it's a special CoCoRaHS snow stick where we're measuring the depth. Now, because there was a lot of drifting of the snow yesterday, we selected a couple of different locations to measure that were sort of representative of the snow all around. I didn't measure in the deepest drift, and I didn't measure in the bare ground where the snow had drifted away. And then you average those. So I was going to say like we could have a guess, like who guess how deep it was. Um, but in the interest of time, I will just show you. So after taking four different measurements, we had an average snow depth at Lindalore Nature Foundation on the western end of Nantucket at 7.85 inches. Um, And I did mean to say this earlier. I mean, I think one of the reasons that having this localized data is so important is many of us know that if it's um, raining or snowing on the western end of the island, it might be doing something very different mid-island or on the eastern side of the island. And a lot of us have seen that before. So when I pulled up the map this morning our average snow depth was 7.85, and then I put it into the map, and then we look at who else reported we can see that our yellow dot on Nantucket is within a similar range to Martha's Vineyard and Cape Cod. And that makes sense for us. This map is just showing Massachusetts data. And then also just keep in mind that at this point, because it was a snow day and a lot of people didn't get to their gauges, this isn't representative, I would say, of all the gauges. And this was the only dot for Nantucket, but we know that we have other active gauges on Nantucket as well, just to preface that. The other way we measure snow is what we call the snow water equivalent. So this is our gauge this morning, and it shows that there was snow, and then overnight it kind of rained on top of the snow. So it's concentrated, and it's basically an ice chunk at the bottom. So what we do in that case is we take it inside, we let it melt, and then uh, or we encourage it to melt, maybe. And then we measure that amount of water as the snow water equivalent. And so we pour it into what was our inner tube to get that amount. And so, drum roll, I guess, of how much water we had. So we had 1.34 inches of snow melt equivalent. Sorry, my dog is making lots of interesting noises. Um, and so when we look at that, so this is the snow melt equivalent, we see that this is a little bit more variable from the snow depth amount map that I showed you earlier. So we're in kind of the same range as some of our other locations. But what I actually think is the amount of water or the amount of snow that ends up in the gauge is quite variable because of wind. So more so than maybe wet precipitation, not frozen precipitation, because I was thinking of the snow last night was so light and fluffy that it was easy to not be captured in the gauge. And so, that is something that is expected. So anyone using this data kind of knows that snow water, snow melt equivalent, there's some more variability to that. But those are just another way to measure precipitation. And so I just thought I'd go through some of the visualizations that you can see right away. So you can see it's really fun when we work with student groups and in the schools and we show some of this information as they're learning about weather and climate. Because you can, in any given day, you can look at a CoCoRaHS map. Shh, shh, shh. You can look at a CoCoRaHS map and see where the precipitation patterns are. So even if you didn't live on Nantucket or in New England, you can look at this precipitation map and see, okay, well, there's something going on in the East Coast. And there's, whether it's snow or rain, you can see that where that pattern is. When you zoom in a little closer, you can see it gives you more of a picture of the gauges that have been active today, and you can see where the oranges and reds are falling, which are those higher. This is the snow melt equivalent. Excuse me. And if you zoom in really close with this particular view shed, if you're close enough, then you can actually see the amounts. So you can see that we are 1.34 on our end of Nantucket, and you can see how the Vineyard and parts of Cape Cod what their measurements were specifically. So another question we get a lot is like, who uses the CoCoRaHS data? So as I mentioned before, weather forecasters use it, hydrologists, water managers. There's a lot of information that comes out when there's flooding events. So using the CoCoRaHS data to look at like the amount of rainfall and storms has been really used in a lot of emergency planning. And sometimes if you look at the news, if you're watching, I don't watch a lot of TV news, but occasionally they'll have a CoCoRaHS, they'll put a CoCoRaHS little quote or something from their local people who measure. And then this example is actually from Tennessee, from Nashville, Tennessee, but this uses CoCoRaHS data, and I really liked this one because it shows the picture on the left-hand side is without CoCoRaHS data. You can see just the official precipitation stations that would have showed, this is precipitation in this area over a 24-hour period. But when you add in the CoCoRaHS network, you can see a more fine scale pattern of the precipitation. And that makes a big difference for the records of the rainfall and precipitation in that area. And then as I think about it as an ecologist, what the plants are experiencing, how the habitats are, being affected in that area. And then if you're thinking about heavy rainfall, you can be thinking about potentially how the communities are going to be affected in those areas. Now for Nantucket, there are years that we talk about heavy rainfall and heavy snow, but really in the last year, we've been really focused on drought. So this map is from July 1st of 2025 when we were in the midst of our drought. So we were in a mild drought at that point. And you could see over time, over the summer, some of our ponds dried up, kettle hole ponds dried up, and a lot of our trees and shrubs went into early dormancy as there was a lack of rainfall throughout the summer. Now by September, this was August. Nope, this was September 9th. September 9th, when our drought level was raised to a level 2, this is where we started seeing that the early sorry. My dogs are just really loud. I'm really apologizing. So in September is when we really saw the early onset of fall coloration and leaf drop. And then when we looked at our CoCoRaHS data for the time, so I'm going to walk you through this figure. This is the CoCoRaHS data for the Linda Loring Nature Foundation from January of 2025 to August. And the gray bars are the 30-year normal for our area. And the green bars are the actual precipitation that we measured. The purple bars are snow, and so we're not going to focus on the 2025 winter. But what I want you to notice is these 3 months of June, July, and August, how little precipitation there was compared to the 30-year normal. So in June, we were at 23% of normal. July, we were at 31% of normal. And August, we were at 35% of normal. So 3 months in a row of really very lack of rain. So then you can see, our localized data really backs up what was being seen at the state level and what they were looking at when they looked at our drought indicators. Um, all right, so I was this was big news on Nantucket recently, is that our drought status was updated mid-January, on January 12th, and we were actually elevated further to a level 3 drought. And I think it surprised a lot of people on island because we aren't feeling the effects of drought. Like in the summertime, we were feeling the effects of the drought because the vegetation was dry and crispy at a time where it usually isn't. Our ponds were kind of drying up and had low water levels. And then we had a lot of water restrictions. This time of year, when we're having some snow and rain events, it feels like, why are we in a level 3 drought? But the Nantucket drought designations are based on groundwater levels. So even though we've had precipitation from the sky, and we're like seeing precipitation, we're seeing maybe runoff on the street. The readings the readings are from a state monitored well, which is measuring groundwater. And of course, we need the precipitation to recharge the groundwater, but we haven't had quite enough. So let's look at our CoCoRaHS data again to see, maybe give us insight into that drought designation. And when we look at our most recent data, I have highlighted the areas where we've had lower. I didn't look at the percentages yet for this, but for September, you could see, so we had June, July, August, and then September were significant drought months. October, we had a decent amount of rain, and November, we had a decent amount of precipitation. But it doesn't look like that was enough to recharge 4 months of very little precipitation. And then in December, we had about 50% of normal. So while this January, we're almost back up to normal, we still have a long ways to go to help recharge those systems. And so this is just one of the, I'm just looking at this and looking at patterns, and it's making me think, I'm really happy that we're collecting this CoCoRaHS data and our localized precipitation for our location as we look at our habitats at Linda Loring. And so this is where my pitch is for other people to join us. I say we need you. We want more people to have CoCoRaHS stations, both to contribute to the whole, to have more data across Nantucket. It'd be great to have a network of other areas so we can get, kind of across the island, have more specific precipitation specific to your location. But it's also really helpful as if you're wherever you live, whether you're a homeowner, a renter, or if it's at where you work, there's an opportunity to collect CoCoRaHS data. I know a lot of fellow gardeners have their own gauges so they can understand how much it's raining at their location. So that they know whether or not they need to add more water for their gardens. And if you actually switch to a CoCoRaHS station, then you can also be contributing the data to the whole, so that more people can understand the precipitation patterns across the island, at the state level, at the national level. This QR code up in the upper right corner takes you to the CoCoRaHS site where you can sign up. It's free to sign up and anyone can join. There is a cost for the gauge. And so at Linda Loring Nature Foundation, we're so interested in more people joining us and helping contribute data that we're going to be giving away 5 different gauges for people on Nantucket. So if you are on Nantucket, stable. So I hope everyone can still hear me. We would love people to join us. And if people are interested, I'm happy to walk people through a more detailed training and help them get a gauge at their location. Along at CoCoRaHS, they have they have a huge depth of knowledge about precipitation, but also being having started in 1998, they have a huge resource library of training. So they have general trainings, they have in-depth snow trainings, they have like frequently asked questions. They have all sorts of things about ice, about fog and dew. Um, it's there's a plethora of information. It's been updated over time, and so we can totally nerd out on weather and precipitation, and it's a great resource. They had for years ago, they got some grant money to do all these really cute animations about how to measure different things, how to set up a gauge, and how to measure hail. We don't get a lot of hail here, but it's really fun. And then they have a series of webinar talks. So they talk about if you really want to nerd out on weather, which I'm all for it. There's a really great webinar series about all different kinds of weather, all from all around the country, experts to novices. It's really an interesting resource. And then if you're in the education space, there's lots of teacher resources and curriculum. We have used those a lot as we work with the various schools. And so it's a great opportunity to kind of connect kids with weather and then ultimately link to climatic patterns. Um, Early on in 2015, we connected with the Nantucket New School. So they were MANT2. Most of the kids in these pictures have graduated. So they collected data for solidly for about 8 years. Unfortunately, they don't collect anymore, and we're hoping to connect again with a teacher who might be interested. But these kids were really involved in data collection and very proud of their work for a long time. Um, we also worked with Nantucket Public Schools third grade, and there was I notice I'm using the word was a gauge at the elementary school. Of course, this was in January of 2020, and we know what happened a couple of months later. And so over time, the gauge was taken down. And so hopefully maybe we'll connect again in the future. But it's okay. We have years of data with the schools, and then if that sunsets, that's fine. We can always revisit it, but the data are still there and available. And then I wanted to just touch on two other ways that weather and precipitation are measured on island. I'm not going to go into great detail, but I just think people might be interested. One is looking at what is in the precipitation. So not just how much it rains, but what is in that rainwater. And so the National Atmospheric and Deposition Program has a series of over 250 networks across the United States. It looks at rain and snow samples that are collected weekly. Now, the station is located on the Linda Loring Nature Foundation property, but it's run by the Nantucket Land and Water Council. And the QR code here just links you to the NADP website. I don't have any information for you right now about the results of this. It's been almost 10 years of data collection. The data are available. There are bigger picture patterns at the national level that are being looked at, but I'm not necessarily directly involved in that project, so I don't have that insight to show you. But if you do visit, you can go on the website and look for more. But if you go to the Linda Loring Nature Foundation website, the station is visible along our trails. And so the big solar panel is kind of the first thing people notice, but that just powers the whole operation. The On the picture on the right, you can see what looks like a bucket with a lid, and it is a bucket with a lid. Um, in this picture, you can see RJ Turcott, who's our Nantucket waterkeeper, and he's demonstrating that when there is precipitation, there's a motion sensor that takes the lid off the bucket, collects the precipitation, and then as soon as the precipitation stops, the lid comes back on. And so weekly, the Nantucket Land and Water Council collects that precipitate and sends it to one of our national laboratories to analyze that information. So we can connect how much it's raining with what is in that water. And then lastly, another kind of accessible bit of information is that in 2023, so our most recent station, we at Linda Loring established a weather station on site. So it's not just the precipitation, although that is part of it, but it includes the relative humidity, the temperature, wind speed and direction, wind gusts, and you can look at it in real time on our website. So if you go to llnf.org and you scroll down on the main page, this kind of visual interface is on our website. And so what's really cool is for for those of us on Nantucket, we know that we're kind of obsessed with wind. We're definitely with precipitation, but also how windy is it? Because the wind speed really dictates whether or not a lot of the boats will run. So you can look on our website to see how what the wind direction is and the wind speed and what the highest gusts have been at any given time. And keep in mind that we're not far from 40th Pole Beach, so when people want to know, is it good for fishing, you can see the wind speed and direction and what's going on out there. So with that, I'd love to thank everyone for joining us tonight. And once again, I want to make a plug for like who is going to be next in our precipitation volunteers. We have three active stations right now. This map doesn't show our newest one on off of Surfside Road, but we have three different stations that are actively participating in precipitation collection, and we'd love to add more. So please reach out to me at my email's right there or check out CoCoRaHS.com to learn more about the program. And I'm happy to take any questions. Let's see. All right. Thank you for everyone for understanding about my pooches. Yes, they definitely wanted to help participate in data collection. Um, Excellent. So I'm happy for those of you who are here from other CoCoRaHS rain station or stations. We have Cedar Rapids, Iowa represented. I see that. The other thing I'll say is that there is also a very active Facebook group of CoCoRaHS volunteers, and so people, it's a great resource for people to share where their gauges are. There's a lot of great photos of gauges in different locations, but also if people have questions, it's a good community resource for people to learn more about if they're troubleshooting new things. So the question that says, do you use the original gauge as well as the imperial tropo gauge? That is a great question. So, for those of you who are new to this, that question might not make sense, but there are two different CoCoRaHS gauges. So there's an original CoCoRaHS gauge, which most of the pictures were of the original gauge. And then there is a new gauge that is slightly more expensive and it is was deemed to be appropriate. It's a little bit more accurate. We actually were using the original gauge for a very long time. We actually had one finally sort of needed to be replaced, and so we'd replaced it with a few times. And then when it came time to be replaced again, we did replace it with the newer gauge, and mainly just because it was a little bit more accurate. Like we were already buying a new one, so I think both gauges are. They're the same exact size in terms of the 4-inch diameter. Um, there was some calibration studies done to look at both of them. And so the newer one is deemed to be a little bit more accurate, but I think both, both are high quality data. And I think the ones that we're giving out, because we're going to give out five of them, are the new, Imperial ones. So, um, but, um, the question is, I'm interested in getting a gauge. How strict is it that I send the reports every day? Would it be okay if I missed a day of reporting sometimes? That is a great question. We collect data on paper data sheets and then enter them later. So usually we enter them daily. So one thing is if you just write it down and then maybe in a couple of days you enter it, that's also fine. Knowing that you collected it at the time that within the window of time is great. The other thing is that let's say you're going on vacation or you're away for a weekend It's totally fine to not collect data every day. We want there to be everyday data collection, but if you can't collect every day, it kind of fits into your life, I will say. So you can do what's called a multi-day report, which is if you were gone for 3 days, then you measure the precipitation at the end of those 3 days, and there's a separate way to enter that data. So it's marked as a multi-day report. If you are interested and people want to sign up, I'm happy to do an in-person training. You can come to Linda Loring and I can show you what we do. And I can give you a little bit more one-on-one. I just didn't, for this talk, I didn't want to need to give you all the details about exactly how you measure. It's super easy and it really, like I said, fits into your life. I think for Nantucketers especially, I'm sure this is true of many other areas, we're very attuned to the weather. So it just makes sense to have that much more, have your own instruments. So you can be the one to tell everyone how much it rained or snowed the night before. Um, with our big snowstorm recently, I know that on our local community social media groups, that was one of the first things people asked today was how much snow did we get? There's different reports around the island about how much people got. But I think that's the great thing is when everyone can take their own data and share and compare information. It's super interesting. Oh yeah, so Angie was saying it's also helpful to have a trustful neighbor or friend take a picture of your gauge while you're away. Um, it's yeah, not really snow, but it works for rain. I know when I was visiting my aunt in Vermont a few years ago, while I was visiting her, she said, "Oh, we have to go check my friend's rain gauge." And I was very happy to go with her and find out that it was a CoCoRaHS rain gauge that her neighbor had, who was away on vacation. We had to go check it for her. So you'll see that the CoCoRaHS community is a really dedicated community to collecting the data and information. And so a lot of people do find someone else that can collect the data. Our CoCoRaHS rain gauges are specifically at the Linda Loring Nature Foundation because we wanted site-specific information for the property. So we have like other staff members, our interns and volunteers that all like work together to collect that data. So usually there's somebody around that can collect it for us. All right, we have another question. Would you have recommendations of specific and or optimal places to place the gauge? Um, yes, thank you so much for asking that. Um, there are specific requirements and suggestions from the CoCoRaHS community where to put the gauges. And so I was just working recently with a volunteer who wanted to put one on Surfside on his property, and we were trying to decide if it would be better to install a post like we did at Linda Loring or use what he had. You don't want it to be too close to a building because we know that there's a building effect, right? It could block wind, but it could also block precipitation from coming in. You don't want to be under a tree. You don't want to be under power lines. So you kind of want to find a sweet spot where the precipitation will come to the gauge unimpeded. So in the case of our new volunteer who placed the gauge on his property, he put it on his split rail fence that was already established. And then you put it high enough that the gauge is a little bit higher than the post because we don't want bounce effect, right? Like if it's raining really hard and things hit a post and it could bounce in. So you have it a little bit higher. But of course, if you're interested in installing a gauge, these are things that we can go over. And also there's a lot of really helpful information and suggestions on the CoCoRaHS website. And also the CoCoRaHS Facebook page is a really great place to look at photos of all the different ways people have put their gauges. Cool. Well, thank you everyone once again for joining us tonight. And I encourage you to help collect some precipitation. And if you ever want to come out and check out the gauges at Linda Loring, they're right by our property office. And if you come for any of our public walks, you can see them yourself, and we'll be happy to give you a demonstration. All right, with that, I want to once again thank everyone, and I am going to end our recording.